Hey TCSTV viewers, it's Evelyn coming to you live from the camera store, and I'm with the TCSTV live dream team. Tonight we have Gary and Graham working behind the scenes. And thank you so much for tuning in to the Art of Self-Portraiture with Lizzy Glad. And this is sponsored by Sony Canada, and we actually have our local Sony rep Anthony, and he's going to be in the chat to answer any gear-related questions that you have. And if this is one of your first times tuning into our live streams, you can actually do so right here, and make sure that you're subscribed and hit the notification bell so you can hear about these events in the future. And also, on that note, if you registered for this event, we'll also be sending out an email with some exclusive Sony offers for Canadians. Sorry if you're not in Canada, we only ship within Canada. But if you make a qualifying Sony purchase, and you can reclaim up to 10% back on a single item on a prepaid Visa card. So again, if you're in Canada and you're registered for this event, watch out for that email and the details. And also, Elizabeth is going to have a special offer as well that she's going to mention a little bit later on for her prints. It's going to be a very good deal, so make sure you pay attention to that. And if you want to be added to our list, you can actually email me, evelyn@thecamerastore.com, and I'll make sure that we send you those offers after this event. And the best part about going live streaming is, of course, being able to interact with all of you. We see already in the comments that there's people from all over the place, and so welcome from wherever you're tuning in from. You can ask lots of questions in the chat throughout the entire event. We will be trying to get to as many of them as we can, as well as a Q&A at the end. And if you're not logged into YouTube, you still want to participate, again, my email address is evelyn@thecamerastore.com, and I'll be checking both of those as well. So if you don't know our guest already, Elizabeth Gad, who's also known personally a lot of the time as Lizzy, is an artist and photographer based in Vancouver, Canada, and she is most at home in the mountains, forests, fields, and ocean, which have all been very heavily incorporated into her self-portraiture. So she combines that with real landscapes, and she often spends days of the time at the wilderness, really enjoying and creating these ethereal images that really evoke a peaceful solitude and the beauty of matching her own heartbeat with the beat of nature. And I'm just so thrilled to be able to welcome Elizabeth Gad. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yay! Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Evelyn. I'm so happy to be here and to share with everybody today.
Yeah, and we were just chatting before the show that you're finally enjoying a little bit of sunshine where you are. It's been quite
Yeah.
rainy.
The sun just came out about an hour ago and it's been raining forever, basically. So I'm very happy right now.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we can't wait to get into your photos. So why don't you go ahead, share your
Thanks.
screen, and we'll just get right into it.
Sounds good. All right. Let me just pull up the screen. Can everybody see that all right?
That looks great.
Awesome. All right. I will just dive right in. The art of self-portraiture. By way of introducing myself, I'll take you guys into a scene. Um,
Can we have her on the screen?
how do I say this? How about picture yourself in the mountains, far away from civilization. Maybe you're this tiny human standing on the edge, being absorbed by the mist and fog, and it's cold, and you think you're in the middle of nowhere with nobody else around. You're enjoying the solitude and the misty scenery. And then you might turn around or come around a corner on the path and you see an odd scene, perhaps a person wearing a dress and stumbling, jumping back and forth between a couple of random mountain rocks with nothing else really in sight. And you wonder, who on earth is that person jumping back and forth barefoot in a dress in like 2 degrees Celsius and nobody else around? Well, that person is me. And it might be quite an odd sight to see at first. And if I saw you looking at me, I would get quite self conscious and I would probably grab my camera and pretend that I was shooting pictures of the wet rocks or little plant things and uh, taking some macro shots, which actually, thinking about that now, that kind of seems weirder. Taking some macro shots in the mountains barefoot in a dress, that would be even weirder than just continuing on with sticking with what I was already doing, which is self portraits. So, as I'm jumping back and forth on these rocks, looking all dorky and slipping and sliding everywhere, the attempt, which often doesn't work out, but when it does, is to create a self portrait like this one. And yeah, so this is what I do and what I have been doing for almost 15 years now, which is crazy. I enjoy spending my time out in nature, often hours hiking away. I'll take my tent into the mountains and camp out for a few days at a time. And I'll just wait for the right light to hit. Like this magical morning, for example, I hiked up into these mountains um, in the fog and rain and snow with no view for 2 days until on the second morning I woke up and the fog just opened as the sun rose and presented me with the scene. And I donned my dress and set up my camera and took this self portrait. Yeah. So, what I like to do is try to tell stories through my work. And I use self portraiture as a way to immerse myself into nature and really feel that connection with nature. And some of these photos are taken mostly around my home. This one is taken in Scotland 3 years ago. And I will quickly include a picture of my dog Pepper. Um, and I'll tell a funny little story. When I first got started in photography, um, before I really got into it, I was into dog training with my previous dog Pepper. And we ended up winning this really cute dog trick competition on YouTube, which the prize, it was a Canada wide contest, and the prize gave us enough money to buy my first camera and to go on my first overseas trip, which sparked my love for travel and my photography really took off from there. But 15 years ago, when I started photography, I called myself Dizzy Photography because Dizzy rhymed with Lizzy, and Lizzy was my name. When I started 15 years ago in 2007, I had joined Flickr. Does anybody remember Flickr? It's still around. And yeah, Flickr was where everything started for me. I started by sharing photos of nature and animals and wildlife. And I've always loved the wilderness. And even before I started taking photos with my dad's little point and shoot camera that I stole, I was always drawing or painting nature and wildlife. So this is where it began for me, just taking photos of these little scenes and posting them to Flickr. And then throughout 2007, 2008, 2009, I started to make a lot of friends on Flickr who were doing self-portraits. And I started to get inspired by these friends who, a lot of them are now like best friends and like family to me. So it's amazing the connections you can make through photography online. But these friends who were doing these projects, they were called 365 projects, where they were taking a self-portrait every single day for a year. And that seemed to be the kind of popular in thing in around 2009. So then I decided at that point that I wanted to be a photographer, and what better way to grow as a photographer than to immerse myself into the challenge of taking on a 365 project. So I decided this spontaneously on the night of New Year's Eve in 2009. I decided the next day, starting on the first day of 2010, I would take one self-portrait every single day for that entire year. And I hadn't really done many self-portraits before, and I'd always been, I preferred to be behind the camera, taking photos of nature and wildlife and not in front of the camera. But I knew that in order to grow as a photographer, this would be one of the best ways to challenge me and really push me to step outside of my comfort zone. And it really did push me outside of my comfort zone. At this point in time, I still didn't have any particular style. I never missed a single day for the entire year, even though sometimes I would wake up at like, I'd already be in bed and realize at 5 minutes to midnight I hadn't taken a photo. So I'd run out and grab the dorkiest selfie photo, and that would be what I did for that day. But for the most part, I was able to go for walks or go to the forest or the lakes or the seaside and take a self-portrait. And I didn't really have my particular style or niche yet, but I did, as the year went on, I started incorporating my love of nature more and more with my self-portraits. And a lot of the self-portraits were really weird, like that top middle one. I don't know why I have like a dozen empty beer bottles there, because I would not drink that. But yeah, I just found any props I could and tried to make a little storytelling scene out of it. So by the end of the year, throughout that year, I actually grew the most probably out of my last 15 years of doing photography. Just because I was taking a photo and editing it and posting it every single day, it really pushed me to learn how to edit better and how to use the camera. And doing that every day, it's amazing. You don't see it day to day, the progress you make, until you look back, like from the month before or then 6 months before, you look back and you realize, wow, I've actually come a long way in how my style is progressing. So by the end of that year, on the very last day, day 365, so New Year's Eve, once again, I took this photo. And I was thinking that at the end of this project, because I really didn't care for self-portraits much, this was more just a project to push me out of my comfort zone and experiment and try something new. And so I thought, oh, I won't do any more self-portraits by the end of this. I'll go back into like super landscape photography or whatever. But on the last day, I decided to go out to this lake in the snowy mountains and go out with a bang by taking a photo in the early morning at the still scene. And it was while I was here, this was the first time that I had really gone far out of my way into the mountains to take a self-portrait. And I was there, And this was a cold morning, like maybe minus 12 degrees, which is pretty rare for Vancouver temperatures, but this is one of our rare cold spells. So I was there, and all those rocks were covered in this sheen of ice. It had been windy the night before, so the water was splashing up and then froze, and then everything stilled out in the morning. So I decided to set up my camera and go out to these rocks and take this photo. And I did slip in the lake a few times up to my knees. And because it was so cold, the dress from my knees down froze like cardboard around my legs within like seconds. But I just had to laugh. And being in the cold and being in this moment while my camera was taking these pictures, I realized this was one of the first times where all of a sudden I felt completely present. I could feel the coldness on my dress and on my skin, but I could see the beauty surrounding me and how still the water was and the reflection of the snowy trees in the lake. And I just kind of went into this trance of being completely present. And then it clicked in that moment. I realized that this is what I want to do. That maybe I'm not done with self portraits yet. Maybe I want to go out and capture these moments of connecting with nature and immersing myself into nature and feeling the peace that I find when I am out in nature, and then capturing these moments to remember and to share with others, and hopefully bring that feeling of peace across to others as well. So after that day, I continued taking self portraits, not every single day, but for the next 12 years since. So this one, titled Run Home, is taken on one of the roads just local to me, about 5 minutes up the road. And this one was taken, I think, in 2013, so about 3 more years after my 365 project. And this is one of the photos that, to this day, I think is still my most viral photo, which I almost didn't post because this was the first photo that I had ever done a little photoshopping where I was throwing some leaves up into the air when I was taking a bunch of photos in the scene. And then I photoshopped those leaves from some photos into this photo of me running away from the tree. And I wasn't sure what I thought about creating photos like this instead of capturing the scene exactly as it is. So this was an entirely new experiment to me, just putting together some pieces of photos from the same shoot. But I ended up liking it, and I thought I'd post it and see how it did. And then it took off and went viral for the last 9 years and has been stolen numerous times by companies and random book covers and whatnot. So, but what can you do? But yeah, it's just surprising. The things that you think might not do so well end up doing the best out of all your work. So I continued taking these photos throughout the years after my 365 project. And as I went on throughout these years, taking these photos became the most therapeutic experience for me. It gave me a better respect for nature and also for myself. It became a way for me to lose track of time and let all my worries fall aside and remember how small I am in the world and how connected we are to this world, and that what matters is just being here and present in the moment and soaking in our beautiful surroundings. And yeah, so those last 12 years since the 365, my style and skill developed gradually over time. And this photo, for example, was taken, I think, in 2014. And this is a lake local to me that I go back to time and time again. And this photo was taken just last year at that same lake. So I love going to this lake because every sunrise is completely different. But when you can time it right, you can often get this still, glassy water. And it's like a dream to photograph at sunrise. And this photo in particular wasn't exactly a dream to capture. It was beautiful there, but the days that this lake is super still are in the middle of winter, so it's cold. And this tree stump, which I like to call a water horse, I think it looks like an ancient gnarled old water horse just sticking up out of the water. So when I found this water horse tree stump log thing, I immediately had this image idea in my head. And I found this tree stump actually about 3 years ago. But the water levels of this lake, the lake is dammed at one end. So the levels of the lake go up and down. And this water horse is usually buried underwater for most of the year. It might be above just 1 month out of the year, usually in December or January. And so after finding this, I waited and waited for the right conditions for the low lake levels and for the water to be still and for there to be mist and fog to all come together and create this scene. And it took a couple of years before everything actually came together. And then the day that it happened, I set up my camera and I didn't realize how deep the water was to get to that log. It came up to about my chest. So it was -2 degrees. I had to wade through to this log, and it was so slippery from being buried underwater normally. So I had to climb up and try not to fall off into the water. And then my lovely dog, Pepper, does not like to be separated from me. So he kept trying to swim out to me. But every time he did that, of course, it messed up the reflection. So I had to keep climbing back down and taking him back to the shore and telling him to stay. And then I'd go back and he'd try to swim out again. And then I'd have to go back down and wade back to shore and tell him to stay again. And this whole process took 2 hours that morning to finally capture this image. And I was frozen by the end of it. But I was so in the zone of capturing this moment and being here in this moment that even though I couldn't feel my fingers or my toes by the end of it, I I was just fully present in there, and it was a little frustrating going back and forth that whole time, but I was so so happy when I finally came away with this scene.
Very tough, which I think that's an
Aw.
understatement. And yeah, it's great to hear about your mindset and talking about just being present in your environment and appreciating that, because I think that that comes through in your photographs so well, that
Thanks,
you
Evelyn.
are present in them. And of course, yeah, lots of comments on the ethereal look to the photos. And it looked like, I think next we're going to be talking a little bit about how you're able to achieve that look with some of your
Yep,
equipment. But before we get to
exactly.
that, there was a question a little bit earlier, and I think this maybe
Yeah.
speaks to your history of being a self-portrait photographer, is have you always gone at it alone? You were just mentioning that you bring your dog with you. Do you ever worry about, safety? You're going into these frozen lakes by yourself. What is that experience like for you?
That's a great question. Most of the time I am alone. At least I have been in the first, let's say, 13 years until I met my partner, who's also a photographer, Christopher Andrus, and now he tags along a lot of the times. But for the most part, these photos I am alone, and I always make sure I'm in relatively safe places, or if I am hours away from civilization, um, I always make sure I have the right equipment that I need and like shelter, tent, food, stove, um, some kind of emergency radio device in case anything happens, bear spray, the whole works. You don't want to be too well, you can never be too cautious. So yeah, when I shoot most of these, I am alone, and um, that's I think how um, my work comes across best when I create it when I'm alone because that's when if I'm with people, I'm more focused on how they're perceiving the landscapes or making sure that they're enjoying their time. Whereas when I'm alone, that's when I can fully immerse myself into my surroundings and feel fully present and just let my mind go into its creative zone and create these scenes. Not
And
sure if
yes,
that answers
that was
the
a question
question.
from Lee Bedford. So thanks so much, Lee, for that great question. And just a reminder to the audience, feel free to ask questions throughout. I also have a few in my email that we'll get to shortly. And then
Awesome.
just before you get into gear, I just wanted to mention one more time that Sony Canada is sponsoring this event. And so they do have a special offer that we'll be emailing out. And if you're not already on the list, if you didn't register, just send me an email to evelyn@thecamerastore.com and I'll get you on that list, as well as Lizzie's offer as well for some prints that we'll chat about in a little bit here.
Yeah. All right. So many of you are probably wondering how exactly I take these self-portraits or what gear I use, which brings me to what's in my camera bag. And please excuse the dorky photo of me down there with my giant lens and my glass of wine. Um, I just felt really cool in that moment, but when I look at it now, I look pretty weird. But anyway, in my camera bag, I have the Sony A7R III that I've been using for the past 4 years, I believe now. And I love that camera. I love the Sony mirrorless cameras. They're light in compared to when I used to shoot Canon, although Canon has gone mirrorless too, so that's cool. But I have a good soft spot for Sony. And I love having the lighter lenses and cameras specifically for when I'm doing my multi-day backpacking treks and dragging all of my gear out into nature, because every ounce less is very helpful for those treks. My favorite lenses are the Sony 50mm 1.2 and the 35mm 1.4 and the 85mm 1.4. And what these lenses all have in common is their extremely shallow depth of field, which I always like to use in my images to create that dreamy kind of scene where the foreground and the background is both quite blurred out, and then it just feels more dreamlike and ethereal. And yeah, so those are my favorite go-to lenses to create those kind of scenes. And then I also got a 12 to 24mm lens last year, which I've been really enjoying for those wider angle shots as well. I use a Vanguard VO204AB tripod, which I've had for many years now, and I'm not even sure if that one's still being made, but Vanguard tripods are pretty awesome. And
You guys
oh,
know, is
nice.
that one still current?
I got that one like 8 years ago, so I have no idea if it is or
Yeah,
not.
it actually, yeah, we actually do still have it.
Oh, nice. I like that one because it's light enough I can take up mountains, but sturdy enough it still holds my camera equipment. And it has been accidentally knocked off mountain cliffs multiple times and it's still mostly together. So it's pretty sturdy. And then I also use my Platypod Max, which is like a flat tripod, which I'll show you how that works in one of these next slides. And then I also always have chocolate in my backpack because that is very important, especially if I'm out in the mountains and need some kind of form of energy or just a snack. Or yeah, it's very comforting. And now you might be wondering how I shoot my self-portraits. How I set it up is, well, I find the scene and decide where I'm going to put myself in that scene. And then I put my camera on the tripod, and I used to shoot with a remote. But the amount of times that I've accidentally broke my remote, either by dropping it down a glacier, running over it with my van, sitting on it, dropping it in a puddle, multiple scenarios, remotes became a bit of a hassle for me. And plus, I couldn't go very far away from the camera when I used a remote. And it was hard to hide it because you'd be clicking it in your hand to take the picture. But when you're shooting self portraits, you don't really want to be seen holding something in your hand. So I was delighted when Sony came out with in their camera, they have this time lapse app thing. So now I use that, which when I put it into time lapse mode, I can set it to take a photo. I usually set it to take a photo every 2 seconds or so. And then once I hit the shutter button, it'll start taking a photo every 2 seconds until I come back. And then I hit the shutter button again to turn it off. And that is the best way that I found to shoot my self portraits, because then I can go out in front of the camera worry free, not carrying any remotes, and it might take 100 or 200 shots while I'm out there striking various poses. And then when I come back, yeah, I have a lot of shots to look through, and hopefully 1 out of 100 are semi graceful enough to use as my photo. And a lot of people also ask the question, how do I set my focus in the photo? What I do is I'll focus automatically on something that is where I'm going to be standing or sitting in the or in the image. I'm stumbling over my words here. So I might put a rock or a stick, or most often I put my dog where I'm going to be. Pepper's a great stand-in. So like in this scene, I sent Pepper out to the end of the dock. I told him to sit there. I came back to my camera and I used autofocus to get the focus right on him. And then I switched the focus to manual while it was still locked on Pepper. And then usually I would call Pepper back to the camera and I would go sit or stand where he was if I was doing a self-portrait. But in this scene, I just thought it was so cute that Pepper was there. So we took a portrait together. So this is the platypod, and not all shoots look great in this setup. I'll explain this situation. This is in the Badlands of Alberta. This was minus 15 degrees. It was 3 a.m. I had just woken up in the back of a truck with my partner. We were sleeping in the truck, hoping that the skies would alight with aurora that night. And then, sure enough, at 3 a.m, it did. And I'm not going to lie, though, I was a little grumpy because I like my sleep, but I was still inspired enough to get out and at least try to take a photo. So I donned my warm clothes and headlamp, and I was trying to find this scene where I could do a self-portrait with the aurora. And we were on the edge of this canyon in the Badlands. So we had this little plateau that we were sitting on the frozen ground. And just about 15 feet beyond where I'm sitting was a cliff that just drops off. So there wasn't really anywhere to go down into the canyon. There might have been, but I was too scared to go down there in the dark. So we were just shooting up on the plateau. And I was trying to find a way to put my camera low enough on the ground that if I stood at the edge of the cliff, the camera would be low enough and aimed up that it would capture most of the sky above me. And that's why I love platypods, because they're like a flat tripod that you can put your camera on and then just place it on the ground. So it's just an inch or so above the ground. And most of my photos are actually shot from ground level, which I'll show some more photos after this to kind of show how I shoot those ground level photos. But in this case, the platypod was still, my camera was still too tall to get the right angle I wanted. So I was crawling around on my hands and knees in this dirt and frozen ground, and I found a gopher hole, which I put the platypod in. So you can see that it's down at more of a dipped angle. So my camera and platypod was in a gopher hole, and I was waiting for the aurora to light up more again. And I had everything set up and ready to go. And I was waiting till the last minute when I felt it was worth taking off my clothes to put on a dress and get in front of the camera. This is a cell phone shot that my partner Chris took when finally the aurora lit up, and I ran out there. I put on my dress, ran out there, and I lit a candle to try to take this magical photo holding a candle in front of the aurora. But it was so cold and windy, the candle kept blowing out every 5 seconds. So we had to relight it and try again and relight it and try again. And with minus 15 degrees Celsius in the wind, I was so frozen. But all the perseverance did pay off in the end, because we managed to turn this into this. And this image has become one of my personal favorite images. And I love to share this story because you can take such a simple scene, like just being on this dirt plateau in the middle of nowhere in the Badlands of Alberta, but with the right angle and the right atmosphere, like this dancing sky, you can create something magical. So yeah, that's one of my favorite images. And this is another example taken with a platypod where I had my camera quite low, which I love shooting low because it creates more of that blurred foreground, which kind of draws your eye right into the center of the photo where I like to place myself. That was a cold day as well. It was snowing up there in those mountains. So I curled up and decided to take a photo kind of portraying how I was seeking inward, how do I say, just looking after myself and loving myself, because that's a good thing to do. And
Lizzie,
this photo,
we have a really good question that I think
yeah,
it'd be a good time to ask this. And
absolutely.
so this is from Dave Bennett, and he said, pretentious questions incoming, but I really like his question. I want to get to them. So, are your pictures an exercise in self-concealment or self-revelation, or neither, or both? And does your
Ooh,
partner always recognize the versions of yourself in your work? It's
whoa,
a big
those
one.
are some good deep questions. Okay, so the first one, uh, self-concealment or self-revelation, is that the question?
Yes.
Um, Both, honestly. There's a lot of them I'm facing away from the camera and not showing my face, and I'm often um, I'm quite what's the word, self-conscious, so I don't really like to show myself in front of the camera. But at the same time, doing these self-portraits is a way of embracing who I am in front of the camera, and it is very much a self-revelation for me to find myself into uh, basically show my feelings through my self portraits and photos. And it's often in these moments that I'm creating that I feel this connection to nature and to myself. And yeah, so it is quite self revelation y. But yeah, also definitely with the side of self concealment as well, because I don't like taking photos like right of my face up close. So I always like to kind of incorporate myself further away and kind of more at one with nature. But the second part of that question, what was that again?
I've lost it now. Hold on one
Wow.
second. Oh, does your partner always recognize the versions
Right.
of yourself in your work?
I think he does. I think at first, maybe he didn't. And when the first few times that we went shooting together, and he loves to shoot me as well. And um, the only problem is sometimes when I'm too cold or grumpy and don't want to model for him, or I want to focus on my own self portraiture, my partner always tells me now how he recognizes the subtle emotions behind my face or my foot stomping, he says, when I'm grumpy, but I don't think I'm that grumpy. But he says he recognizes now when I need to create alone, and he'll often, for the photos that I take where I don't mind having him around and they're like joyful images, and I love having his help, sometimes standing in to help press the shutter button or be my human tripod if I forgot my tripod. But then there's some moments where when I really get into the zone of creating, he recognizes now when I need space to get into that zone. And so he'll uh, go shoot some of his own work, maybe 100 meters away in a separate field or something. And I'll be shooting my own. And then when I'm done, I'll wave and be like, hey, I'm done. Do you want me to model for you now? So, yeah, I think I love the way that we work together now. It took a little bit of trial and error to figure out how we work best together in creative scenarios, but now we complement each other very well, and he's amazingly helpful as well for well, carrying heavy stuff on a lot of backpacking trips. So I like him for
Oh,
that.
that's great. And then there was another very good question that I thought kind of ties into this, and this one was from
Yeah.
Stephanie. And she said, how do you get over the self consciousness of posting self portraits in your early days?
I was so self-conscious the whole time, but because I had already challenged myself with that 365 project, I decided to go all in and post even if the self-portraits were terrible. I was like, well, I already committed to this. I'm all in. I have to post one every single day. And now, um, like it's kind of worse in a way now because I don't have to take a photo every single day. So now I pick and choose which ones I share. So half of my work is unseen now because I am too self conscious to post it. So I mostly save the ones that I am more proud of, um, which maybe isn't always a good thing because perfectionism is never really a good thing, even though I am guilty of being a perfectionist too often. But uh, the few times that I have shared some of the self portraits that I was more self conscious of lately, that I was a bit nervous how the world would react to them, they actually ended up connecting with more people than the photos that I was excited to share. And I think it's because people can kind of perceive the feeling that you're trying to get across in the photos. I don't really know how to explain it, but when I do embrace my anxiety and self-consciousness and just put a photo out there anyway, it's kind of liberating, not just for me, but for other people as well, to see that and think, wow, like I can do that too. And yeah, so I'd say just go for it.
Excellent.
So this photo taken in an ice cave, because I tend to shoot in a lot of cold places. That was just last year. And here's another photo also taken at a cold place, but it wasn't as cold that day. But most people ask me, or they say to me, oh, I love all your photos. You can never take a bad photo. That is definitely not the truth. One photo out of 100 might turn out all right, like this one, but I can guarantee you that 99 of the other photos look something like this. So if you're looking at my photos and you're wondering how you can ever get to that level, just remember that all of my outtakes are pretty dorky, weird, either me falling off a rock or striking a really weird pose. And my chest is super sunburned in that photo too, which it is right now as well. And I just sunburn really easily, I guess. But yeah, but you just gotta embrace being a dork and have a good time. And when the time is right, you might get a nice photo like this, and sometimes you might just get a bunch of dorky photos to remember the day by. I will go just briefly into how I edit some of my photos because a lot of people ask me that. And for the most part, I like to not edit my photos too much, but I edit all my photos in Lightroom. And this is a raw image, a raw self-portrait. And what I usually do is I just work in Lightroom to bring out the colors and the tones and the light to its best potential without overdoing it. And then I'll also use the clone tool to take out a lot of distracting items like some of the logs in the corners and the bubbles in the water if I want to smooth that all out. So the final image might look something like this. You can see it's just much cleaner, and I use the paintbrush tool in Lightroom as well to really bring out the colors, like the yellow dress. You can see in the raw image here how faded my yellow dress is. All of my dresses are very faded and grass stained and muddy and torn up because I just crammed them in my backpack and then I put them on and roll over mountains and forests with them for these photos. So they're not very pretty, but with a little bit of work with the paintbrush tool in Lightroom, I can bring out the colors and try to create something a little more magical looking. And same example with this photo here. This image was taken in Cusco. I found this waterfall staircase that I thought was absolutely magical. However, realizing now as I was climbing up that waterfall staircase, the strong stench of, well, I think we realized that it was sewer water that was coming down, and there was garbage everywhere. You can see some garbage hanging off the waterfall and on the side. And so it was pretty nasty. It was very smelly, but it was such a beautiful looking spot. So I still went for it. And this is the raw file, but with a little bit of cleaning up and cloning out the garbage and just really bumping up the light and painting some more yellow into my dress and bringing out the yellow of the flowers on the side, I was able to change this image into this. So definitely a difference, but pretty easy. And I hardly ever use Photoshop at all, just mostly Lightroom for all of these things. And it just is the easiest way that I can find to do it. And it's kind of like painting when I used to paint images before I took images. Now when I'm using the paintbrush tool in Lightroom to paint in more of the colors, it throws me back to the days when I used to paint, and that makes me happy. So now I'll talk just briefly about one of my favorite projects that I'm currently working on and have been working on since 2014 is the Red Dress project, which most of you might know me for this project of my red dress images. This started in Iceland in 2014, and it started as well, I'll read this to you. The Red Dress series is a symbolization of my wish to live wholeheartedly. It's a reminder to myself to not be controlled by my fears and doubts, to embrace who I am, and to focus on a life lived boldly with love and gratitude and absolute wonder of the world and everything in it. So this series, I was trying to think of a series to start when I planned my first trip to Iceland. And when I landed on this Red Dress series idea, and as a way to show how to be bold in front of the camera and to challenge myself again to step out there and let the world see just being boldly in love with the world and grateful for it all, and to never forget the wonder of the world. And now this series has continued on for years, and I don't know if I'm ever going to stop. But I took it all around Iceland, taking this red dress into the mountains and into waterfalls. This waterfall is like a shower in a cave, a cold shower. It was very, very wet. And thankfully, I had a friend there that day who was able to, I put him on lens cleaning duty because every moment between each shot, the lens just got covered in the mist from the waterfall. So that was very helpful. And more red dress photos in Iceland. And this red dress series has also led me to some interesting situations, such as when I took this photo. Some of the best, most magical photos. This is one of my favorites. Standing up on this mountain with all these streams of rivers coming in from the valley. This was in Thorsmark in the highlands of Iceland. But to get here involved a little bit of this. So thankfully that wasn't our vehicle, but it was the vehicle that was coming behind us. We had to get through this river to get to this location. And the river was rising and we just made it through. And unfortunately, this vehicle behind us did not. And we didn't know the people in there, but we rescued them. It was a bunch of ladies on a tour with this tour guide. And we were able to get them all back across to our side of the river. But we were on the side of the river in the highlands and we were all stranded there. And nobody could come rescue us because the river just got higher and higher for 2 days. So we were stuck in the highlands. And thankfully, there was this hut there that normally people can come and stay at, but because it was out of season, it was shut down. But there was somebody who was staying there just behind the scenes and keeping an eye on things. So he let us in and we were able to stay for a couple of days. And the only food that they had there was coffee and oddly cake. So it wasn't that bad to spend 2 days just drinking coffee and eating cake nonstop. And then when the rain and snow finally briefly stopped, we were able to hike up this little mountain in the highlands there. And I caught this photo to remember this trip by. And then we were rescued in the end by this legendary Icelandic farmer who had a big tractor truck, like the biggest I've ever seen. And he still couldn't cross this part of the river, but we had to hike a couple of miles up through the mountains to a narrower, shallower part of the river where he was able to come across and pick us up. And it was, well, thank goodness for that because my flight to leave was that day. So we got rescued just in time. And now we have a great story, but still feel sad for that car that was pretty useless by now. Here's another one from Iceland. And I took the Red Dress series to Scotland as well, just climbing around as I like to do on big rocks. Another one from Scotland. I won't lie, there's, as magical as this looks, there is a lot of sheep poop on these hills. And because it was raining and slippery, there was a lot of me slipping and rolling around in sheep poop while taking this photo. But I think it paid off in the end. Another one in Scotland. And Scotland again, there's just something about those highlands. They are glorious. And most recently, I took the Red Dress series to Madeira just this last October. into this magical forest. I created a little 5-piece set in this forest called Fainal Forest. And these trees are ancient trees. I read somewhere that they're between 500 to 800 or 1,000 years old. And they grow very slowly, and they're all bent and gnarled and just amazing. And this forest is on top of a mountain, which is usually in the clouds. So you're immersed in this foggy atmosphere. And sometimes it's very pleasant fog, and sometimes it's like super rainy, windy fog, which is very challenging to shoot in. But with a lot of perseverance, me and my partner stayed in Madeira for a month. So we were able to keep coming back to this forest up the mountain to try again and again to get just the right foggy conditions to create these images. And I am quite pleased with these results. So these are the latest of my red dress series. As you might guess by now, I seem to really have a thing for trees in my photos. But there's just something about finding a tree, especially a lone tree full of character, and connecting with it on this soul level, I guess. I don't really know how to explain it without sounding like a cheesy hippie, but I am a cheesy hippie, so there's that. And this was also taken in Madeira. And funny little story about this image is I almost didn't take this, and now this has become my most popular photo of the last 6 months since I took it. But I was wandering around shooting other photos of the trees, and my partner Chris was at this spot shooting self-portraits under this tree. So I kind of stole the idea from him. But my partner Chris, lovely guy, he was also taking his own self-portraits and decided to go for a more personal nude scene sitting under that tree. And I thought that was lovely. I standed to the side to make sure nobody came while he was shooting his nude self-portrait under the tree. And he got a remarkable self-portrait. And then I stepped in and took this self-portrait as well. And later that day, we unfortunately discovered that the mossy ground is infested with ticks when Chris found several on his bottom. And so we had to deal with that. And since then, now we are very careful with where we're sitting and trying to make sure that there's always something. Thankfully, I have a dress between my bottom and the ground, but I always bring now, I got these little tick tweezer things to pull them out if any come on me, and they work pretty well, and ticks are scary and not fun. So yeah, be prepared. You never know where ticks will find you. Scary creatures.
Speaking of scary things,
Yeah.
there's a question here about from Veronica if you actually climbed on the rocks or if you Photoshop yourself in. She said, I don't know how you could pose on such dangerous narrow rocks without fear of dying.
I climb the rocks, and sometimes I do have a fear of dying, but I also have a massive fear of heights. So the rocks that I climb, when I set up the camera, I usually set it up at an angle where it looks really scary and dangerous, and maybe to some people it still is, but when I actually climb the rocks, I always make sure that they are safely climbable. And when I stand at the top, I make sure there's a way for me to grab onto something if a breeze starts blowing me towards an edge. Or I am quite afraid of heights, so I'm generally pretty careful. But yes, those scenes are all real. I did climb those rocks, and I haven't died yet, so that's good news.
That's very good news.
Yeah. So these self-portraits with trees, they just go on and on and on. So I'm going to roll into the next subject here, which kind of plays into connecting with nature and connecting with oneself. Expressing our souls through art. This is a little subject that I like to touch on because I don't know about you guys, but I tend to go through a lot of dry creative spells and creative ruts. And for example, like these images. This one is from Madeira, and all these photos from Madeira are actually the last images I've taken, which was 6 months ago, and I haven't taken a new one since. So, but I will be this summer. But for now, I've been working on all my work behind the scenes and marketing and editing and all that. But I do go through these frequent creative drive spells, and sometimes they stretch on for longer than 6 months, sometimes a year and a half. And that is completely normal. A lot of people, like in the earlier days, shortly after my 365, I kept going through these dry spells for a few months or up to a year at a time, and thought that maybe, I don't know, like maybe I wasn't good enough to keep creating, or I kept comparing myself to other people, especially as Instagram came in and everybody was posting every day these mind blowing images. And it's so easy to get caught up in the comparison game and self doubting. And that really started to take a toll on my mind over the years. And until about 4 years ago, I started to think of it differently, all these creative ruts. And instead of letting myself get lost in the comparison game on social media, I decided to look at art more how I originally looked at it before social media played such a role. But I started to look at art again as not a way to share to gain popularity, but a way to express ourselves. And now, whenever I do hit one of these creative dry spells, there's usually two ways that I look at it to get through them. Is one, I'll push myself to keep creating, and sometimes that's all you need, like a 365 project, just the little challenge of creating something every day or once a week, and not being perfectionist about it, but just putting it out there. And sometimes that's enough just to get the creative ball rolling again. And then the other way I've discovered is to step back completely and kind of learn to find where your own joy comes from again, and go spend time in nature, not with the camera, and start listen to your surroundings and look at your surroundings and just be present and just be, and don't put pressure on yourself to create. And eventually the creative juices come bubbling up again, and learn how to start expressing yourself again. And then my favorite way to get through these creative dry spells, I wrote an article about this a few years ago, which I'll share a little excerpt from here. So, what's my reason to keep creating? This is this helped me when I read back over the years as well. My reason to keep creating is me. I am here, my thoughts, my emotions, excitement, sadness, peace, anger, love, all of it. It's very real, it's very me. And here I often am, lying defeated in the creative rut and wondering why I can't summon the energy to continually create epic, mind blowing images, when all along I could be creating something just as important and just as powerful by gently pouring my feelings into my work. This work doesn't have to be amazing. It doesn't have to have thousands of views and likes and comments. It doesn't even have to be shown to anyone else. This is just me, just us, a glimpse into our souls, plain and simple and extravagant as they are. Art should not be a popularity contest, a competition, or a comparison game. Art comes from what we feel and is an expression of our deepest selves, and whether our art connects with 100,000 people or 10 people should make no difference. If the goal of an artist is to create something of meaning, even if it only means something to you, then it's already a masterpiece. So this is something I think about quite often now when I have these ideas that I want to shoot and create, but I don't think it'll be good enough, or that it won't be seen by enough people. And then I remember that that doesn't matter at all. What I want to create should be something that I want to create for me, something that means something to me. And ultimately, when you create from your deepest self and create something that means something to you, that tends to honestly also be the work that connects with most people when you do share it, because they can feel that depth of connection and the depth of soul in that photo. So these are a couple of photos I took last year on Vancouver Island. The one on the left is called Surrender, and the one on the right is called Go Bravely On. So I like to look at these photos when I feel myself in that kind of creative dry spell where I realize that I should just surrender to whatever I'm feeling and then go bravely onward and create through it anyway and create something for me. And that's the most important thing. This image is also a prime example of that kind of mindset where I took this to portray some feelings that I had at the time of vulnerability and heartbreak and surrender. And I wasn't really planning on sharing this image. And then it ended up being one of my favorites, one of my personal favorites ever. And this was taken in a tidal pool by the ocean and at sunset, and the storm was just rolling over. So the clouds lit up all these brilliant colors, and the tidal pool was so still. And I've called this the calm before the storm. And yeah, I took this photo and for me, and then it was right after I took this photo that all of a sudden all my creative inspiration came blasting back. And at the same time, the storm clouds just erupted. And I took this photo right after. You can see all this rain coming down behind me. And I didn't capture any lightning in this image, but there was lightning coming down everywhere, and thunder was roaring, and the wind suddenly just kicked off like crazy, and which was such a difference from the stillness of this scene, the calm before the storm, to this. And I just felt so energized, and my heart felt so full after creating what my soul needed to create from its depths. And then suddenly it felt like I was flying and on this new creative energy level. And yeah, so once the lightning and storm got real close, I did run away because I realized that my tripod was metal and I didn't want to get struck by lightning near my tripod. So I ran away pretty quick. So as we're getting closer to the end of my talk, I just want to share a few little tidbits that I can share with you about how to grow as a photographer, or at least what works for me. Just some little creative, inspirational things. How to grow as a photographer, first of all, and what I touched on before, is to create for the sake of creating. And like I said, don't create to become popular and it's just create for the sake of creating. Create to share your soul through your art, and that will get you further than creating for the likes and the hearts and the comments will ever do. Do the things that scare the crap out of you. This is a huge key to growing as a photographer, and I literally mean things that scare the crap out of you. Like for me, one of the biggest scary things is public speaking like this. And yeah, I am a nervous pooper. So I literally get this crap scared out of me before these public speeches. But every single time that I've done one of these, no matter how nervous I am beforehand, once I'm in it and sharing, and then at the end, when I'm finished, the feeling of exhilaration and of knowing, or hopefully knowing, that my work has connected with people, or when people come to me after and share that it did connect with them. It's such a beautiful feeling to know that the images that I take for myself can also deliver something for the viewers, the other viewers out there as well. And yeah, so basically just do the things that scare the crap out of you. Climb that scary looking rock, but also be safe. Don't fall off a cliff. Climb those mountains, do those public speeches, reach out to that client you've always wanted to shoot. You'll never know until you try. Embrace failure. This is where the biggest growth occurs. And again, like, you cannot grow without failure. You literally can't grow without failure. And the amount of times that I've failed, whether trying to get in touch with clients and being turned down every time, and or trying to take certain self-portraits and failing due to weather or technical camera aspects, and all of these failures, I try not to take like as a punch in the gut, but more of a realization of, oh, so that didn't work. So that just means that I've narrowed down the ways that I can figure out what can work. So every time you fail, celebrate, because you've just discovered that maybe that's not the way to do it. So you can move on to the next way to do it and to keep pushing yourself and keep growing. And find your people. This is probably the biggest tidbit of advice that I can give to anyone who wants to grow as a photographer. And this is a lot coming from me as an extreme introvert who spends most of my time away in the mountains, solo, alone, shooting my own self-portraits. But your people are important. And if it weren't for my people, my photography would not be where it is today. Right from the beginning, when I joined Flickr and I made those friends back in 2007, 2008, and those friends who, even if we don't see each other much in person, but at least support each other and stay in touch over messages online and photography, like Facebook groups and friends made through workshops, all these people that I've connected with who were all coming from such different walks of life from different countries all around the world, but we all have that one thing that connects us all, which is a love for creativity and photography. And when you find the right people who don't tear you down and don't see you as competition, but rather as people that you can collaborate with and who lift you up and who are always there for you, that makes a huge difference. And when you find these people, it just lifts you up when you can, where they might, how do I say, you just have all these new opportunities given to you when you're working together with groups. And if somebody has a job that they can't take and they pass it on to you, and then just the friendship levels as well when you're going through a hard time and they can lift you up, and getting together and traveling together, doing workshops together. It is the best feeling in the world to be surrounded by basically family. And if you can't find these people, if you don't have these people in your life, the best advice I can give to start is by being that person. When you're engaging with communities online on Instagram, be kind and reach out to people and let them know what your work or their work means to you. And as you spread that kindness and positivity and lifting others up, those people will come back to you and bring the same to you, and you'll find your people. And that is the biggest, best advice that I can give, honestly. So before we get into questions, I will just talk a little bit about one of my most frequently asked questions. How do you make a living off self-portraiture? That is a great question because, to be honest, I don't make most of my living off self-portraits, even though it's what I'm known for. Most of making my living comes from doing side photography gigs, doing client shoots for other people, portrait shoots for other people, and how do I say, video projects and advertising, sometimes for companies that want me to feature their work. But as the years have gone by, I've slowly been able to gain a little bit of momentum trying to make more money off my actual self-portraits through licensing photos to be used as album covers or book covers, through prints, and yeah, basically it's slow, and sometimes it feels like reaching into the void, which is also what this image is called, reach into the void. And that's what it feels like when you try to make a living off of your passion and what you enjoy doing. But if you keep persevering, then things will start coming to you. And I'll let this segue a little bit into talking about my prints, because that's one of my avenues of work. Because you all have tuned in today, I wanted to give you one of the biggest discount codes that I've ever given out before, which is 40% off any of my limited edition prints, if any of you are interested. And if not, that's totally cool too. But if you are, you can take a picture or a screenshot this discount code here, TCS40 for the camera store 40. And that will get you 40% off of any of my work, which you can find on elizabethgad.com or Elizabeth Gad Prints. And yeah, that pretty much brings me to the end of my talk. But I think there's a lot of burning questions, if I'm right. So I'm happy to dive into that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And I did pop the link into the comments there, so you can grab that link and check that out. And then one last
Awesome.
time, I'll also mention that there is a special offer from Sony as well. That one you do
Yeah.
have to email me for. So it's evelyn@thecamerastore.com. If you're not registered, if you did register for this event, we'll drop you that email afterwards or tomorrow morning. But yeah, we got lots of really great questions. So we'll try to get to as many as we can.
Sounds
So
good.
one of the first ones we have here is about some of your technical stuff. So
Yeah.
if you're using an intervalometer on the Sony a7R III, what is the trick for locking focus on yourself when shooting this way?
I usually keep my focus locked on manual. So like I explained before, if I focus on something like my dog or a rock or a stick, which is going to be where I'll stand, I'll focus on that, whether by putting the camera on autofocus and just locking in the focus on there, or I might switch to manual and then zoom in on the camera um, to see where it's focused. And once that focus is where I want it to be, then I keep the focus locked in manual. And when I get the intervalometer going, it won't affect the focus at all. It'll just take the photos however many seconds apart I set it to take. But as long as the camera lens is set to manual focus, that won't change during the intervalometer process. I'm not sure if I explained it very well.
That sounds good. There's a question here from Nigel. How often do you shoot wide open, or do you have a preferred aperture?
I shoot most, I'd say like 98% of my photos wide open, the widest open it can get. I just love the dreary blurred background and foreground. So whether that's like my 50 millimeter 1.2 or my 35 millimeter 1.4, I'll usually shoot at the widest, the lowest aperture that I can. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think of any photos I have where I shot uh, at a, well, what do you call it? High aperture with where everything's in focus, but I don't think I really have any. I think I just shoot as low as I can.
Another good question is
Hopefully that answered that.
how do you shoot from so far away, making sure that the exposure is right? Do you use your
Mm.
phone or do you measure exposure for your position within the frame beforehand?
I measure the exposure beforehand when I'm setting up, and it is tricky sometimes, especially when the light is constantly changing. I'll have it way too overexposed or underexposed, um, which I'm very glad for how much you can, or this is why I shoot in RAW, because you can, if I underexpose or overexpose, it's so much easier to bring back that missing or details or light in post processing if I mess up on the exposure. But yeah, I definitely will try to lock in my exposure before I go in front of the camera. And the exposure is the last thing I adjust once I have everything else adjusted on my camera, the focus and everything. The exposure is the last thing I'll adjust before I go out, just so I can try to have it as close to the time that I take my self portrait as I can.
Fantastic. We've had a few questions, and I'm going to try to combine them into a two-part question. So one
Okay.
is to do with your clothing. How are you selecting your clothing to match the scenes so perfectly? There's comments about it always matching the composition and getting the tones and the colors right. But then, how much work do you also put into scouting those locations to match your vision?
Well, the clothing, most of my dresses are actually thrift store finds. And then a lot of them are also like the red dress is half of a thrift store dress, and the bottom half is an old red bed sheet that we sewed on because the dress originally, when I got it from the thrift store, it kept shrinking over time every time I washed it or went in the lake with it. And so then we found a red bed sheet and we sewed it on the bottom to make it longer, which is really nice because then it covers up my boots if I don't want to be barefoot in a photo in the freezing snow somewhere. So yeah, my dresses mostly thrift store finds. I do collaborate a bit now with a store called Kayame Threads. That's spelled Kayame Threads. She has a store on Etsy where she sells some beautiful, timeless looking dresses made out of linen. So I have a few from her now that I've been collaborating with most recently. What was the second part of that question? I've forgotten
Oh,
already.
how much work do you put into scouting the locations
Right.
before you actually shoot there? So I guess just to talk a little bit about your whole planning process.
Yeah. Most of the locations, I hardly ever plan photos ahead of time, except for uh, very rarely on the occasion, maybe 5% of my photos. But most of the time when I'm out and hiking and location scouting, I'll have my camera and my camera bag with me, but I won't even have any ideas of what I want to create. I just more prefer to be out there hiking, being immersed in nature, being in the moment. And most of my photos have happened very spontaneously when I'm hiking and suddenly the mist might open up and the light might be filtering through. And suddenly I'm like, oh my God, this is magical. I need to take a photo now. So I'll quickly try to find a scene that I want and set up before the light disappears and take a photo. So most of the time, it's been a lot of luck. And there are a few locations where I've gone to, like Scotland or Iceland, where I've gone and I've shot photos there. But at the same time as shooting, I've been scouting and thinking of different ideas for future times when I return to those places. And I have a lot of ideas in my head now for some of these places and from past scouting trips. And now I'm just itching to get back and get those ideas going.
Excellent.
Hopefully that answered that.
Yeah, I think so. And I had a few questions that were sent to me by email. So thanks to those of you who did email me your questions. One is, I'm not sure, maybe you know the answer to this, is you reference what can you do when your photos are being stolen. You talked about one of your most popular
Yeah.
photographs that's been used so much. Was there anything that you did to rectify that, or is there anything that you would suggest now that you've experienced that?
There are some companies out there. I can't remember the name of this one, but I'll try to find it afterwards and uh, I don't know where I can send the link to. But there are some companies out there that will search for photos of yours for you and see if there's been any that have been stolen. And then they will reach out with their own lawyers and their system to try to get you money for the stolen photos, and they'll take a cut of that uh, while they go after the person for you. So I like that. But most of the time, for the most part, for me, it's the photos that have been stolen. It hasn't even been worth going after them unless you know that they're making a lot of money on your photos. Then I would try to get work with a company with lawyers that would go after them for me. But for the most part, when I know that they're not making much money, if they've just put my photo out as like a screensaver that the world can download or something, and I'll try to get them to take it down. And sometimes it's impossible to figure out how to get them to take it down, but sometimes I just have to let it slide. And yeah, it's unfortunate sometimes that you can't really do anything. But like I said, if you know, like if my work has been on a book cover and I know that book is a bestseller, I would definitely uh, find somebody to get in touch with the publishers of the book and figure it out.
Absolutely. Now, here's a question on the gear side of things.
Yeah.
What would you say is your favorite lens, your favorite focal length to shoot most of your self portraiture from your kit?
The 50 millimeter. Well, oh, it's so hard to say because I love them all. But I have a soft spot for the 50 because it's the one that I started with during my 365 as well. And then I didn't have a 50 for many years after my 365, just up until a couple of years ago, because my old 50 broke with from falling down mountain cliffs and all that stuff. And it was for my old Canon camera. So when I switched to Sony, I didn't get a 50 millimeter for my Sony for years until just a couple of years ago. And now that I have one again, it's so dreamy. I forgot how magical it is, and I pretty much never take it off my camera now. So if you want a lens that um, just has that really nice shallow depth of field and beautiful soft focus, then get the 50. Specifically the 51.2, but the 1.4 is also really nice.
And you did mention that you were a photographer that shot with a Canon DSLR camera and then you switched over to Sony mirrorless. What has changed the most for you in terms of your approach and what you're able to do with your camera?
Um, as I mentioned before, my favorite part is just how much lighter it is compared to my old hunk of a Canon camera. And trekking with lighter camera gear makes a world of difference. But also the Sony, I've been a huge fan of the video on Sony as well. I've been trying to get into a bit more vlogging lately on YouTube. So I have a smaller, what do you call it? A Sony little vlogging camera. I completely blanked on the name of it.
Series cameras?
Yeah, the RX7, I believe it is. And again, I love how light that camera is. I just got back from Scotland, or attempting to trek across Scotland a few weeks ago, but unfortunately the weather took me out on day 6, so I didn't get very far. But that is the camera I brought with me just because it's so small and light, and I was trying to make a vlogging video, and the video on it is insanely good. So yeah, the video is what I mostly love Sony for, as well as the lightweight and the intervalometer, definitely. But yeah, it's been so long since I've shot anything on Canon that I don't really know how to compare the two now. It just, Sony is my babe. It's my go-to.
Excellent. Okay, the last question I have ties into a question or a comment, I should say, from Nigel, just on what inspires you. Do you look to any other art, other photographers, music? Where do you pull your inspiration from?
Oh, I love that question. There's a few photographers that really inspire me. More specifically, photographer friends that I made back in the early days on Flickr. Laura Zallinga is one. She also does self-portraits, these insanely beautiful self-portraits. And she inspires me with how she gets emotion across in her body language and photos. So I've taken a lot of that inspiration myself and incorporated that into my own way of creating as well. Music also, I love movie soundtracks, anything from like a magical fantasy movie. I'll often listen to that while I'm hiking or creating in the forest, or especially when I get into the editing zone. I love just turning on these magical instrumental soundtrack tunes and getting into my Lightroom painting and editing on my photos, and I will fall into that zone for hours at a time. So I get a lot of my inspiration from music, and as well as books and TV shows, mostly like fantasy type, like Narnia. Yeah, I've always just loved anything magical and with beautiful landscapes and magical feelings. So I think that's where most of my inspiration comes from, and just nature as well, just being out in the mountains. That's my biggest piece of inspiration, is witnessing how nature moves through light and wind and the clouds and the moody skies, and that, yeah, that's the biggest piece of inspiration right there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Lizzy. For all of our viewers, do make sure that you check out her website, especially if you're interested in purchasing prints. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us tonight on TCSTV.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you, Evelyn, and everybody who tuned in. It means so much to me that you're all here, and I hope I haven't been like too dorky and weird, but I did my best, and I am honestly just super honored that anyone would want to listen to me ramble on about how I create my work. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in.
Wonderful. And I have to say, in the comments, there's so many wonderful comments. You'll have to check them out afterwards. I don't think there's anyone in the audience that would that would say anything like that. So yeah, you'll have to look
Oh,
at that. And of
I
course,
can't
big
wait to
thank
read
you
them.
to Sony Canada for helping us make this happen. And of course, being able to connect a wonderful photographer like Elizabeth Gad with all of you. And again, if you've registered for this event, we do have a special offer that we can email out. And the offer is if you make a qualifying Sony purchase for Canadians, you can reclaim up to 10% back on a single item. They'll be on a prepaid Visa card. So if you're in Canada and you're interested in that, watch your emails, or you can send me an email to evelyn@thecamerastore.com. And I also just wanted to say that if you're interested in seeing more TCS TV live, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified of all of our events when we go live. And we also keep these on the show afterwards, so you can go on our channel. And if you go to all of our live streams, you can see a bunch of really great presentations like this with photographers from all over the place. That's the beauty with these virtual events. So thanks again. Thanks to the TCS TV Live Dream team. And we hope to catch you all very soon.
Thank you.